The congressional hearing room fell silent as Jasmine Crockett stepped toward the microphone, her bold red suit standing out against the mahogany panels of the historic chamber. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Just minutes earlier, Nikki Haley had delivered what many thought was a knockout blow, calling Crockett an inexperienced freshman congresswoman who doesn't understand how government actually works. The dismissive comment, delivered with Haley's signature stern confidence, had sent ripples through the audience. Republican supporters nodded in agreement, while Democrats shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But something in Crockett's walk, the determined stride, the slight smile playing at her lips, suggested she wasn't there to back down. As the former prosecutor and now rising Democratic star from Texas approached the podium, she carried a thin folder. What the audience didn't know was that inside lay evidence that would turn Nikki Haley's attack into the biggest political miscalculation of her career. Haley sat composed, her expression unflinching, clearly expecting Crockett to fumble under pressure. After all, Haley had been a governor, UN ambassador, and presidential candidate, but in the next few minutes, Crockett would deliver a response so powerful, so precisely targeted, that it would leave the entire chamber stunned and change the trajectory of both women's careers forever. Before we dive deeper into this shocking confrontation, comment where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our latest political analysis videos. The congressional hearing on government accountability had started routinely enough. Committee members from both parties took their seats under the bright lights, cameras positioned strategically to capture every reaction. This was supposed to be a standard oversight hearing, but Washington insiders knew better. This was really about positioning ahead of the upcoming legislative battles. Nikki Haley had been invited as a key witness, bringing her international experience and Republican credentials to the table. At 52, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had navigated the highest levels of government. Her navy blue suit and pearl necklace projected the polished, professional image she had cultivated throughout her career. As she took her seat, several Republican representatives nodded respectfully in her direction. "Thank you for having me today," Haley began, her voice steady and practiced. "I'm here because I believe in accountability and transparency in government, principles that seem increasingly rare in Washington these days." The committee chairman thanked her for her time, and the questioning began with softball inquiries from Republican allies. Haley answered with practiced ease, occasionally working in criticism of the current administration's policies. The real tension began when questioning shifted to the Democratic side. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, 43, representing Texas's 30th congressional district, sat reviewing her notes. Though only in her second term, Crockett had quickly established a reputation as someone who didn't shy away from confrontation. A former criminal defense attorney and state representative, she brought prosecutorial precision to committee hearings that often caught witnesses off guard. "Miss Haley," the committee chair announced, "Representative Crockett has the next 5 minutes for questioning." Crockett adjusted her microphone, her expression serious. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ambassador Haley, for being here today." Her tone was respectful, but carried an undercurrent of steel that made several committee members glance up from their papers. "I'd like to discuss your statements about government spending and accountability, particularly regarding military funding and oversight," Crockett began. Haley nodded confidently. "Of course. As I've consistently stated, military funding requires both adequate resources and proper oversight," Crockett pressed further. "You've criticized what you called wasteful spending by the current administration while advocating for increased military budgets. Could you explain the specific oversight measures you supported during your time in the administration to prevent wasteful military spending?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Haley's face. "Congresswoman, I think my record speaks for itself. At the UN, I pushed for efficiency and accountability in all operations." "With respect, Ambassador, that doesn't answer my specific question about military spending oversight," Crockett countered. Haley's expression hardened. "Congresswoman Crockett, perhaps if you had experience beyond your brief time in Congress, you'd understand these matters are complex and require nuance that sound bites don't capture." The room tensed at the personal jab. Haley continued, her voice taking on a dismissive edge that played well for the cameras. "What we're seeing here is exactly what's wrong with Washington today. New representatives with little experience questioning those who've actually governed and made the tough decisions. I've managed a state budget, represented our country on the world stage, and actually implemented policies, rather than just talking about them." He turned slightly to address the committee chairman rather than Crockett directly. A clear dismissal. "I'm here to discuss serious matters of national security and government accountability, not to be lectured by an inexperienced freshman congresswoman who doesn't understand how government actually works." Republican members nodded approvingly. One even whispered, "She put her in her place." Democrats shifted uncomfortably, expecting Crockett to either back down or lash out emotionally. Either way, it seemed Haley had gained the upper hand. The committee chairman looked at Crockett. "Representative, you have 2 minutes remaining in your time." All eyes turned to Jasmine Crockett as she opened the folder in front of her. The hearing room crackled with tension as Congresswoman Crockett calmly opened her folder. She didn't immediately speak, letting the silence build for a moment, a prosecutor's tactic that drew all eyes to her. "Ambassador Haley," she finally said, her voice measured but clear, "I appreciate your lengthy career in politics, but experience isn't the same as consistency or effectiveness." Haley's expression remained confident, but she sat up slightly straighter. "You mentioned my inexperience," Crockett continued, "but I think the record should reflect that before coming to Congress, I spent years as a criminal defense attorney fighting for justice in the courts. I've actually litigated constitutional issues, not just talked about them in speeches." She pulled out the first document from her folder. "Let's talk about your experience with military budgets and oversight, since you brought it up." Crockett signaled to an aide who placed a document on the large screen, visible to the entire room. It showed a budget report with several sections highlighted. "This is from your time as governor of South Carolina. You publicly claimed to have implemented strict oversight measures for state military expenditures. But according to the state auditor's report, which I have right here, under your administration, South Carolina had $34.00, $6 million in military funds that lacked proper documentation or oversight." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Haley's expression flickered briefly before she regained composure. The report was politically motivated and, "The state auditor who produced this report," Crockett interrupted, "was appointed by you, Ambassador Haley." More murmurs. A Republican committee member tried to intervene. "Mr. Chairman, the witness should be allowed to respond without interruption." The chairman nodded. "Ambassador Haley, you may respond." Haley leaned toward her microphone. Those findings were administrative issues that were promptly addressed. Every administration faces audit challenges. What matters is how they're resolved, and my administration fixed those issues. "Did you?" Crockett asked, pulling out another document, because the follow-up audit from the year after you left office indicates that 76% of those same issues remained unresolved. The aide switched to a new document on the screen. Several Republican members began whispering to each other. "Furthermore," Crockett continued, her pace steady and deliberate, "you just stated that I don't understand how government works. Let's examine your understanding." She pulled out what appeared to be a transcript. "In a speech you gave at the Hudson Institute last year, you stated, and I quote, 'Congressional appropriations committees have final authority over how federal agencies spend their funds.' That's an incorrect statement of how government works, Ambassador. The appropriations committees authorize funding levels, but they do not have final authority over specific expenditures within agencies. That's executive branch authority." Haley's face tightened. "You're taking my statement out of context. Obviously, I was referring to Congress's power of the purse generally." "The full context of your remarks is right here," Crockett responded, tapping the transcript. "And you made the same claim in 3 separate interviews that month." The tension in the room was building. Haley's supporters looked increasingly uncomfortable. The Democratic representative leaned over to his colleague and whispered, "She's methodically taking her apart." Haley shifted strategy. "Mr. Chairman, I came here to discuss current policy issues, not to have my past statements cherry-picked and misrepresented for political theater." The chairman looked at the clock. "Representative Crockett has 30 seconds remaining." Crockett nodded. "Ambassador Haley, you question my experience and understanding, but the documents I've presented raise serious questions about yours, and I haven't even gotten to your contradictory statements on military funding at the UN versus your current position." She held up another folder. "I have those here as well." Haley's expression hardened into a mask of controlled anger. "Congresswoman, this is exactly the kind of gotcha politics Americans are tired of. Instead of addressing real issues facing our nation, you're playing political games with selective facts." The chairman's gavel came down. The representative's time has expired. But Crockett wasn't finished. She looked directly at Haley. "Mr. Chairman, I have one final question if the ambassador is willing to answer it." The chairman looked at Haley, who gave a tight nod, confident she could handle whatever came next. "Ambassador Haley," Crockett said, her voice now carrying throughout the silent chamber, "given that you've criticized my experience and understanding, would you be willing to tell this committee the exact percentage of military funding that went unaccounted for under your UN leadership, according to the 2019 GAO report?" Haley froze momentarily. This wasn't a random question. It was precisely targeted. "I don't have that specific percentage memorized, Congresswoman. No reasonable person would expect it was 28%, Crockett interjected, pulling out the report. "The highest percentage of any UN ambassador in the last 20 years. So perhaps when discussing experience and understanding, we should focus on quality rather than quantity." The chamber erupted. Democratic members could barely contain their reactions, while Republican allies looked stunned at the precise attack. The chairman banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order. "The gentlewoman's time has expired," he insisted. "We'll take a 10-minute recess before continuing." As the representatives filed out for the break, all eyes were on Haley, who sat rigidly in her chair, aides quickly surrounding her with hushed conversations. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett calmly gathered her documents, fully aware that the real confrontation was yet to come. When the hearing reconvened after the tense recess, the energy in the room had shifted dramatically. News of the exchange had already leaked onto social media, with clips of Crockett's questioning beginning to circulate. Reporters who had been half paying attention were now fully alert, sensing a significant moment unfolding. Nikki Haley returned with a reinforced demeanor, her team having clearly used the break to prepare a counteroffensive. She sat straight-backed, composed, with fresh notes in front of her. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, appeared unfazed by the brewing storm, reviewing additional documents with her staff. The committee chairman cleared his throat. "We'll now continue with questioning. Ambassador Haley has requested a moment to respond to the previous exchange." Haley adjusted her microphone, her voice regaining its practiced confidence. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe it's important to correct the record regarding Congresswoman Crockett's misleading characterizations." She looked directly at the cameras, ignoring Crockett. "The GAO report referenced was a broad assessment of UN operations not specific to my leadership. The 28.4% figure misleadingly combines multiple departments across years, including periods before and after my tenure. This is exactly the kind of selective use of statistics that undermines genuine accountability discussions." Several Republican members nodded supportively as Haley continued. "Furthermore, as someone who has actually led diplomatic missions and managed international relationships, I understand that simple percentages don't capture the complex reality of multilateral operations." Congresswoman Crockett's inexperience shows in her failure to understand this nuance. Haley then pulled out her own document. Since the Congresswoman is interested in records, let's look at her own. In her brief legislative career, she has sponsored 43 bills. How many have passed? 0. Not a single bill. Perhaps before questioning others' effectiveness, she should reflect on her own record. Republican members murmured approvingly at this counterattack. Haley wasn't finished. And regarding South Carolina's military expenditures, the audit findings were primarily about documentation processes, not missing funds. Under my leadership, we implemented reforms that the current administration has continued to build upon. That's how government actually works. Continuous improvement across administrations, not political point scoring. Haley settled back, a satisfied expression on her face. She had delivered a comprehensive response that seemed to regain control of the narrative. Her supporters looked relieved, while several Democrats appeared concerned about the effective counterattack. The chairman nodded. "Thank you." Ambassador. We'll now continue with Mr. Chairman, Crockett interjected. Since the ambassador has directly challenged my statements and questioned my integrity, I believe I'm entitled to a response under committee rules. The chairman hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. The chair recognized Representative Crockett for 1 minute. The chairman said. Crockett didn't rush to the microphone. Instead, she deliberately arranged 3 documents in front of her, then looked up with an expression of calm determination that caused several veterans of Washington politics to exchange glances. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Haley, I appreciate your response. You're absolutely right that context matters. So, let's provide the full context. She held up the first document. This is the complete GAO report, not excerpts. Page 47 specifically isolates the accountability metrics during your exact tenure, comparing them to your predecessors and successor. The 28.4% figure is exclusive to your leadership period, not combined with others as you just claimed to this committee. Crockett signaled, and her aide displayed the relevant page on the screen, with the dates and percentages clearly highlighted. Haley blinked rapidly, clearly not expecting this level of precise rebuttal. As for my legislative record, Crockett continued, while it's true I've sponsored 43 standalone bills, the ambassador conveniently omitted that I've had 17 legislative amendments successfully adopted into laws that have passed. That's actually among the highest success rates for any sophomore representative. She displayed a congressional record report confirming these numbers. Several Republican members began flipping through their own notes, looking increasingly uncomfortable. But the most troubling aspect of the ambassador's response, Crockett said, her voice now carrying a gravity that silenced the room, is her claim about South Carolina's military expenditures being merely documentation processes, not missing funds. Crockett held up the third document, and her expression shifted to one of profound seriousness. This is a confidential memo from your own budget director dated March 15, 2013. In it, he explicitly warns you that, and I quote, approximately $12.00 $4 million in military preparedness funds cannot be accounted for beyond documentation issues, raising serious concerns about potential misappropriation. You signed this memo, acknowledging receipt. The aide displayed the document, with Haley's signature clearly visible at the bottom. The room fell completely silent. Ambassador Haley, Crockett said, her voice now steel-wrapped in velvet, you just stated under oath to this committee that there were no missing funds, only documentation issues. This memo, signed by you, directly contradicts that statement. She paused, letting the implications sink in. I'm not questioning your experience, Ambassador. I'm questioning your candor with this committee today. The silence that followed was deafening. Republican allies looked frozen while Democratic members sat forward in their chairs. Haley's face had drained of color, her eyes fixed on the displayed document with her own signature. Mr. Chairman, Crockett said quietly, I yield back the remainder of my time. The chairman, visibly stunned, merely nodded. We'll take a 30-minute recess, he managed, banging his gavel. As representatives and spectators began buzzing with shocked conversations, Haley remained seated, staring at the document still displayed on the screen. Her aides rushed to her side, speaking urgently in hushed tones, but the damage was done. In Washington's high-stakes arena, Jasmine Crockett had just delivered a masterclass in preparation, precision, and the power of receipts. The aftermath of the Crockett-Haley exchange spread through Washington with the speed and force of a political tsunami. Within hours of the hearing's conclusion, Crockett receipts and Haley exposed were trending nationwide on social media platforms. News networks scrambled to provide context and analysis, with political commentators from across the spectrum weighing in on what many were calling the most devastating congressional exchange since the Watergate hearings. Outside the hearing room, journalists swarmed Congresswoman Crockett as she exited, maintaining the same composed demeanor she'd displayed throughout the confrontation. Congresswoman, did you plan that exchange? Shouted one reporter. Were those documents vetted for authenticity? Called another. Crockett paused briefly. Today wasn't about political theater. It was about accountability. When public servants make claims, those claims should be factual, especially when questioning the capabilities of others. With that, she continued walking, her staff forming a protective barrier around her. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley departed through a side entrance, avoiding the press entirely. Her spokesperson issued a hasty statement. Ambassador Haley stands by her distinguished record of public service. The documents referenced in today's hearing have been taken out of context and mischaracterized for political purposes. We will be addressing these matters fully in the coming days. But the damage control efforts came too late. Political analysts were already dissecting every moment of the exchange, with particular focus on the confidential memo that directly contradicted Haley's testimony. "What we witnessed today was political malpractice of the highest order," said veteran political strategist James Carville on CNN. Haley came in assuming she could dismiss a younger, less nationally known representative, and she got caught completely flat-footed. Worse, she doubled down with incorrect information that Crockett was prepared to disprove. In 30 years of politics, I've rarely seen such a complete miscalculation. On Fox News, even conservative commentators struggled to defend Haley's performance. "Regardless of where you stand politically, preparation matters," noted former Republican strategist Nicole Wallace. Ambassador Haley clearly underestimated Representative Crockett, and it cost her dearly. The question now is whether this damages her credibility for future political aspirations. By evening, the internal document leaked to several major news outlets, confirming its authenticity. Political reporters noted that Crockett's meticulous approach reflected her background as a trial attorney. She hadn't asked any question without already knowing the answer, and she had documentation ready for every point. The following morning, the exchange dominated newspaper headlines. Washington Post: Crockett confrontation leaves Haley reeling. Rising Democratic star exposes contradictions in former UN ambassador's testimony. New York Times: political miscalculation, how Haley's dismissal of Crockett backfired. Wall Street Journal: congressional hearing raises questions about Haley's budget oversight record. The political fallout continued to spread. 3 Republican senators who had been considering endorsing Haley for a future presidential run privately put those plans on hold. Democratic leadership, recognizing Crockett's effectiveness, began discussions about elevating her profile within the party structure. Social media analysis showed that Crockett gained over 200,000 new followers across platforms within 24 hours of the hearing. Video clips of her methodical questioning racked up millions of views, with particular focus on the moment when she revealed the signed memo. 1 week after the hearing, the political landscape had shifted noticeably. Jasmine Crockett was invited to appear on major Sunday political shows where hosts treated her with a new level of respect and seriousness. Her measured responses to questions about the exchange further enhanced her reputation as a substantive legislator rather than a flamethrower. "I didn't go into that hearing looking for confrontation," she explained on Meet the Press. "I went in prepared to discuss policy and accountability. When Ambassador Haley chose to question my qualifications rather than address the substance of my inquiries, I felt obligated to correct the record." Public service requires factual accuracy and accountability, regardless of one's political affiliation or experience level. For Nikki Haley, the path forward proved more challenging. After initially avoiding public appearances, she finally addressed the controversy in an interview with a friendly conservative outlet. Her attempt to dismiss the signed memo as standard bureaucratic language that all executives encounter failed to gain traction, particularly when government watchdog groups filed Freedom of Information Act requests for additional documents from her gubernatorial administration. The Washington political establishment, always quick to reassess power dynamics, took note of the shifting fortunes. Democratic leadership began including Crockett in high-profile policy announcements, while Republican strategists circulated private memos advising their clients not to underestimate her in future confrontations. Perhaps the most telling indicator of the exchange's impact came 3 weeks later, when a different high-profile witness appeared before the same committee. When it was Crockett's turn to question him, the witness began with, "Congresswoman, I want to assure you that I've reviewed all relevant documents thoroughly before appearing today." The subtle acknowledgement of her effectiveness drew knowing smiles from committee members on both sides of the aisle. Beyond the immediate political consequences, the Crockett-Haley exchange sparked broader conversations about assumptions in politics, how experience is measured, how preparation often trumps pedigree, and how underestimating opponents based on traditional metrics can lead to spectacular miscalculations. Political science professors began using video of the exchange in their classes. As a case study in congressional oversight and effective questioning techniques, law schools similarly incorporated the footage into trial advocacy courses, highlighting Crockett's prosecutorial approach. 6 months later, when asked about the exchange in a profile for The Atlantic, Crockett offered perhaps the most insightful analysis of what had transpired. What happened that day wasn't about me or Ambassador Haley personally. It was about a fundamental principle in public service, that facts matter, preparation matters, and no one is above accountability regardless of their resume. I think the exchange resonated because people are hungry for substance over style, for leaders who do their homework rather than rely on reputation. In that moment, I was simply doing my job as a representative assuree, ensuring that the American people get straight answers from those who seek to influence public policy. The article noted that since the hearing, Crockett had leveraged her enhanced profile to advance substantial legislation on voting rights and judicial reform, turning momentary fame into lasting policy impact. Meanwhile, political observers noted that Haley had significantly adjusted her approach in subsequent public appearances, showing greater caution in her statements and a newfound respect for thorough preparation. As one veteran Capitol Hill staffer observed, in Washington, reputations are built or destroyed in defining moments. For Crockett, that hearing was her arrival on the national stage. For Haley, it was a painful reminder that in politics, as in courtrooms, you should never ask a question you don't know the answer to, and never dismiss an opponent who might have the receipts. The lesson echoed across Washington. Underestimate Jasmine Crockett at your own risk. She doesn't just come with questions, she comes with receipts. If you found this breakdown of the Haley-Crockett confrontation informative, don't forget to like this video and hit subscribe for more in-depth political analysis. Comment below with your thoughts on who you think won this exchange and what other political confrontations you'd like us to cover in future videos.